Hey guys, Maynard here. This is weird. I'm gonna be honest. This is very weird for me. Um, this is gonna become the new normal for the next couple months here, and I'm gonna have to get comfortable talking to myself in the middle of my apartment with the computer screen looking me dead in the face. Um, and I'm sure it's just as weird for you sitting in front of your computer and like not getting to sit in a real classroom. But we're gonna dive in head first, and we're gonna make the most of this. What we want to transition you guys towards here is we're getting ready to do Romeo and Juliet, which is my favorite part of freshman English. I look forward to Romeo and Juliet all year. Like, don't get me wrong. I like the Odyssey, and I really do enjoy And Then There Were None, and a lot of the other things we do. But Romeo and Juliet is like my bread and butter. That's what I sit and I wait all year for. And when I found out that we weren't going to do it together in class, I was a little bit heartbroken. But we're going to do this, and this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to have to be the one who does all the parts, and I'm going to have to be the one who makes this whole thing kind of work. So bear with me, and I'm going to be awkward about this, but I think we're going to have a lot of fun. But before we can start reading Romeo and Juliet, before we can start getting into all of that good Shakespeare stuff, we have to kind of go back a step or two and do some basics. So there's a PowerPoint that I would have shown you guys if we were in class together, but we don't have all the time in the world. We're trying to do this a little bit quicker. We're trying to do this so that you don't have to sit through an hour worth of me like talking at you every day. So I have a PowerPoint. I've taken a bunch of the fluff and filler out, and I'm going to read you through it. I'm going to share my screen on here so you can see what I'm looking at. It's the same thing that I'd show you in class. And hopefully it helps to give you some basics that'll kind of build you towards Romeo and Juliet here in the coming weeks. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'll share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. Boom! PowerPoint. All right, sonnets, rhymes, meters, and other fun stuff. What is a sonnet, Maynard? I've never heard that word in my life. Okay, a sonnet. A sonnet is one type of poetry. There are many different types of poetry that have been popularized over the years, and each of these different types of poetry uses, some different sets of rules, and they have certain parameters that the poets that write them are supposed to adhere to, right? It's kind of a game that they play where it's like, all right, here are the rules. Can you write something beautiful within those rules? Our focus isn't going to be on all the types of poetry. We're just going to focus on sonnets. And the reason that we choose to focus on sonnets is that that's what William Shakespeare was most well known for writing aside from his plays. Sonnets, as it says on the third bullet point down there, are poems about desire of some sort. They're often romantic in nature. They don't have to be romance poems, but oftentimes it's about how much someone misses their beloved or something like that. So what do you need to know? In order to understand sonnets, you're going to need to know some basics about poetry as a whole. So here's what we're going to cover in this PowerPoint. 1, we're going to talk about what rhyme scheme is. 2, we're going to talk about meter, not a meter stick, meter in poetry. And then finally 3, we're going to talk about different types of repetition that's used by poets. Okay, first one on that list, rhyme scheme. And there's a goofy little cartoon there because I didn't want to have a blank slide. You're welcome. Rhyme scheme, probably not the kind of quote unquote scheme you're thinking of. Not a scheme like the game scheme for breaking into the museum included disguises, a getaway car, and Krispy Kreme donuts to distract the guard. Not that kind of scheme. This kind of scheme, the third bullet point down there, an organized system of things or an arrangement. So an example of a rhyme scheme, think like the scheme for an irrigation system that includes like pop-up sprinklers, drip lines, and misters. An arrangement, an organization pattern. So in blue at the bottom, when you think rhyme scheme, when I say what's the rhyme scheme of a poem, think rhyme arrangement or rhyme structure. So how do we put this into practice? How do we actually understand a rhyme scheme? It's pretty easy to find, as it says over on the left. We're going to read the poem together. I'll read it to you. You're going to see the colors of the words at the end of each line. And each word at the ends of the lines has the same sound as the ones that are in the same color right beneath it. And then, as you see the note beneath there, we're going to denote this by using the alphabet. So before we get into Shakespeare, before we get into a bunch of really tricky stuff, we start with a poem that's really kind of a baseline. It's called The Boy Who Laughed at Santa Claus. And it goes like this. In Baltimore, there lived a boy. He wasn't anybody's joy. Although his name was Jabez Dawes, his character was full of flaws. In school, he never led his classes. He hid old ladies' reading classes. His mouth was open when he chewed, and elbows to the table glued. He stole the milk of hungry kittens and walked through doors marked no admittance. He said he acted thus because there wasn't any Santa Claus. So, going back to this idea of a rhyme scheme and how do we actually mark a poem up, if we look at that same poem, we already had the color code going, but you wouldn't have a bunch of different highlighters or colors necessarily. So instead of just doing colors, we would denote it as it does here with letters. So when I'm asking myself what the rhyme scheme of a poem is, I look at especially a sonnet, I look at the word at the end of each line. So line 1, in Baltimore there lived a boy. Line 2, he wasn't anybody's joy. So immediately there I recognize that that's a pair that rhymes. So I would put boy, I'd put as it has there the letter A, and then joy, since that matches boy, I'd put an A as well. Then I get to the third line, it says, although his name was Jabez Dawes. But then I have to ask myself this, I say, all right, boy, joy, Dawes. Okay, Dawes is different, that doesn't rhyme, so I gotta go to the next letter to denote that. So A, logically go B. Dawes, his character was full of flaws. Does flaws rhyme with Dawes? It does, so I put another B. You're starting to sense the pattern. And we get to the fifth line. In school, he never led his classes. Does classes rhyme with flaws, Dawes? Or does it even rhyme with boy, joy? No, so I just mark it with a C. I'm not gonna go through all the lines. I'm not gonna waste your time that way. The one thing I will bring to your attention is it's following a regular pattern where it's 2 lines at a time, right? Like boy, joy, Dawes, flaws, glasses, chewed, glued, kittens, and mittens. So it's easy to get carried away and think that, okay, I just do A, B, B, C, D, E, E, F. Wait, those last 2 lines, 11 and 12, down at the bottom of the screen, if you're not already noticing this. He said he acted thus because there wasn't any Santa Claus. I still have to go through the whole thing and say, does cause or clause, does that rhyme with any of the previous lines? And I look up and I say, does it rhyme with boy or joy? No. Does because rhyme with Dawes or flaws? Oh, wait a minute, it does. And when I recognize that, I gotta still use that same letter because it matches, right? So I look and I say, all right, Dawes and flaws, those were B's. The last 2, they're B's as well. And this is gonna be the format that most sonnets follow. It's having 2 at the bottom that kind of bring back something previous. So continuing with the rhyme scheme thing here. Rhyme, there's 2 different types of rhyme that we might talk about. We probably won't have time to get to both of them. What we were looking at there on this previous slide, these are end rhymes, because it's the word at the end of each of those 12 lines that we're talking about rhyming. An end rhyme, the repeating of similar vowel sounds at the ends of lines. Example, I don't think I'll ever see a sight as lovely as a tree. I hope you see a sight lovelier than a tree. That's a weird example. But still, it's the end of that line. Internal rhyme is when you have these same repeating sounds, these similar vowel sounds, but it's within a single line. So instead of hitting enter and going to line 2, 3, 4, it's all within one line. Example right there on the screen, the cat in the hat sure got fat off mice and rice. So you have a couple rhymes. You got the cat, hat, fat, and then you have mice and rice, which also rhyme. 2 things that'll come up later in this that I'm just going to throw out there now. We have things in poems, especially in sonnets, called quatrains. And a quatrain is a group of 4 lines unified by a rhyming scheme. So, for instance, on this one on the previous slide, we're going with little couplets, these 2 at a time batches, where it's A, B, B, C, C. But it's not going to be like that in every poem. You're going to have some where it alternates, where it'll go like A, B, and that would be a good example of a quatrain there, group of 4 lines, where those 4 kind of alternate. And then finally, much like we had here at the very bottom on lines 11 and 12, we have a couplet, 2 adjacent lines of poetry that rhyme. This whole thing is actually a series of couplets. All right, now moving on to poetic meter, to be or not to be. What's poetic meter? When we speak, you and me, every single day, when we speak, we naturally put more stress or emphasis on certain parts of a word. So for example, take a moment here, think about the syllables in your first and last name. You can write it on a piece of paper, you can pause this video if you want to, but take a minute and think about the syllables, the individual sounds that make up your first and last name. Which ones do you say with the most emphasis? These, in poetic terms, we would call those the stressed syllables, not because they're freaked out and they're stressing about coronavirus, but because we emphasize them. So whenever I say stressed, think emphasize. So think about what words, what syllables in your first and last name receive that stress that you say with a little more umph. And then think about which syllables you say the least. These would be the unstressed syllables. An example that I usually do in class when we're doing this, when I'm talking about stressed and unstressed syllables, is I'll ask the room, okay, the word, I don't even say it out loud. I stop and I say, okay, think to yourself, the name of the town we live in. It's 3 syllables long, right? But, right? I'm not saying it on purpose. There are 3 syllables, and one of the 3 is stressed more than the other 2, okay? So I'm gonna ask you which one sounds correct. We live in the town Snow Home-ish, Snow Home-ish, or Snow Home-ish. I'll do it one more time, see if you can tell the difference. Snow Home-ish, Snow Home-ish, Snow Home-ish. Personally, if I think about the way I naturally say it, I would say I stress the middle syllable, where I say Snow Home-ish, more so than saying Snow Home-ish. Snow Home-ish, it goes up in the middle. But I digress. Poetic meter